Thanks everyone for joining us tonight for the Holidays 2020, Navigating a Less Than Festive Season. I'm Lindsey Whissel Fenton. I'm a senior producer at WPSU Penn State, and I'm joined by some wonderful humans who took time out of their schedules for this discussion because they all share a commitment to supporting the well-being of others. Megan Devine is a psychotherapist, grief advocate, and author of It's Okay That You're Not Okay, Meeting Grief and Loss in a Culture That Doesn't Understand. She's also featured in WPSU's Speaking Grief Initiative. Dr. Jonathan Shepherd is an award-winning mental health professional. Named top doctor in the field of psychiatry, his mission is to help all individuals obtain access to quality mental health services. He is currently the Chief Medical Director with Hope Health Systems and President of the Board of Directors for the Black Mental Health Alliance. Phuong Thao MacLeod is an embodiment coach who uses her training in life coaching, trauma resolution, and yoga instruction to promote well-being. She specializes in helping women of color reconnect to their bodies' aliveness and worthiness through mind-body practices. We're here to talk about what we can do for ourselves and those around us in order to stay well and healthy during these challenging times. This discussion is for you, so we invite and encourage you to share your questions via the chat function, and we will get to as many of them as time allows. But before we begin this discussion, I want to pause for a moment and just take a moment to recognize and acknowledge all the people that will not be here with us this holiday season. At the risk of stating the obvious, 2020 has been a tough year for many, many reasons, yet it can still be hard to practice self-compassion even with everything we have going on. I know something I've caught myself doing is either in self-talk or when I'm talking with friends, saying things like, I don't know why I feel so overwhelmed. I shouldn't be feeling this way, or my schedule is less hectic with COVID going on. I should be able to handle things. So in an effort to extend some grace to ourselves and to others, what should we be aware of in terms of the weight we're all carrying and the overall impact everything that's going on might have on our ability to function normally, even if we might not be fully conscious of that? Megan, let's start with you.
Yeah, it's funny because I was having this conversation with somebody earlier today that I do this stuff for a living, talking about being kind to ourselves in times of distress, and that it's okay that you can't function in the ways that you're accustomed to functioning. And I don't even do this myself very well, right? Like, even though I do this for a living, and the thing to remember here is that these are not normal times. And there have been so many losses and so many stressors and so many things sort of crowding into us that I don't think we recognize on a daily basis how much stress we're under and how much transition we've all been through for various reasons, from the pandemic to social justice, to election season, to the holidays, to personal losses, all of these things. And even if we're not aware of them, all of them on a moment by moment, day-to-day basis, they're sort of the elephant in the room, right? They're sucking up a lot of resources, even though we might not be aware of it at all times. So there's a reason why you're not productive. There's a reason why your coping skills aren't maybe quite as stellar as they sometimes are, why you are exhausted by 10 o'clock in the morning, even if you had a full night's sleep. There are a lot of things that are weighing on us individually, in family systems and communities and collectively. And I think it's a practice to remember that, right? And I think we can get sort of meta about it and like beat ourselves up for not being kinder to ourselves when we know that things are tough. It's like just the like Looney Tunes thing of like bigger hammers, bigger hammers, bigger hammers. Just catch yourself when you are beating yourself up for not performing to previous standards, when those previous standards just really don't apply right now. We're all under a lot more stress and a lot more distress than I think that we are conscious of on a daily basis.
Yeah, it's a lot. And it's so important to check in with our bodies to truly see what is our true capacity for doing things. And also find myself like wanting to reschedule things and feeling guilty about it. And reminding myself that, I truly can't show up in this way fully, and it's best to move things and communicate honestly about where I am. And, you know, most oftentimes people understand this is a different year. And so it's normal to want to move things or do less, or, you know, because we don't have the same capacity as we did.
Thank you. And Jonathan, what are your thoughts on just kind of the weight we're all carrying right now in 2020 and what that means?
Yeah, I agree with the two panelists that just spoke. I mean, just even hearing them talk, I felt the weight come over me. and one of the phrases that I have adapted this year, I think it speaks to Megan's book, is that I'm functioning, but I'm not okay. And I've been able to come to terms with that. That was difficult for me. One that is supposed to be in control, one that's supposed to have the answers, one that's supposed to be able to know what is to happen next. Well, let me tell you, this year has just taken it all out of pocket. I'll just say it like that. It just pulled the carpet from underneath my feet. And people just feel like they have no sense of control. And when you feel like that, that is a feeling of helplessness. And there's been so many people who want to do better, but they just feel powerless, helpless. And that's what's happened this year. I talk a lot about this being the Quadruple Jeopardy year. Quadruple Jeopardy meaning healthcare disparities, the COVID-19 pandemic, the police brutality on Blacks, number 4, the economic loss, the financial loss that we have. All this has occurred. Now, many of these things were occurring. The COVID-19 pandemic was not occurring necessarily last year, but the other 3, some of those things were occurring prior to. And so it's kind of like a perfect storm. And so with all this happening all at one time, it's made us feel powerless and helpless. And so for those who are watching out there today, I feel you. I know what it is to be functioning, but not okay. And so I'm grateful that we're talking about this today and let you know that we identify with you.
Thank you all. So moral of the story is we all have a lot going on right now with ourselves. And, you know, it's a great time to be gentle and compassionate with ourselves and others. And I think even though those of us who haven't lost something we can concretely identify, we have all lost our sense of normalcy this year. And I just want to take a moment to acknowledge that while discussion is part of the Speak in Grief initiative, which is focused a lot on death-related loss and grief, we really want this discussion to be a supportive space for people who are grieving a loved one. But I also want to say that we want it to be a supportive space for people who are carrying any type of loss. And we want to hold space for all those losses, if it's a job, loss of health or ability, loss of your traditions. We know that when we do this, it can feel like we are somehow comparing these losses and these griefs when we acknowledge that there are many different types of things people can be carrying. And so Megan, I just want to address that off the bat and just say you often say that all grief is valid. So how does that acknowledgement that all grief is valid differ from saying all grief is the same?
Yeah, those are 2 completely different things, right? I want to sort of link back to something, you know, the rest of us were talking about here, and it's like the magnitude of loss is just orders of magnitude bigger than usual, right? And I think you're right that it is like this perfect storm of things interlocking and coming up. It's like we don't have our normal backdrop of life to situate these things in. And so it's almost like, you know, we don't have anything else to do, so let's pay attention to violence in the Black community or social inequity or all of these things. And awareness overload is also a loss, right? And so I just want to kind of grab that back in here too, that we've lost a lot of the ways that we refill our tanks, or that we reorient ourselves or re-anchor ourselves in the world. We can't do those things anymore. And that inability to find anchor or refuge or refill our tanks makes dealing with these cascading losses even harder, because we have no inflow. It's like, it's all outflow at this point. So I'm really glad that we're all here talking about this, because honestly, talking about it is part of what feeds us so we can continue to show up in the ways that we need to. And part of showing up in the ways that we need to is normalizing that all grief is valid. And I think that where this gets confusing is where we think that all grief is exactly the same. And that's when you get into these grief competitions, like, how dare you talk about divorce when my child died? They're not the same thing. And how dare you talk about the loss of routine when at least you still have a live child? Like, I think we get into these boundary skirmishes because compassion is in such short supply. And what happens when there is a scarce resource as we fight over it, right? And one of the reasons that we like to talk about, like, this is a welcoming space to talk about any loss that you're carrying, is if we treat compassion as the abundant resource it is, we don't have to fight about who deserves it, right? So your loss of daily routine, your loss of autonomy as a parent, suddenly having to be a parent and a professional and a partner and a teacher and a fixer of all things, while you're also juggling what's my response to the social world and where is anything in all of this, that is a valid loss, right? And all loss deserves to have space where it can be heard and honored and acknowledged. And if we want a world where all of our losses are met with kindness and compassion, we have to vote for that world with the way that we treat others. So that's why we start conversations like this by saying all loss is welcome, even if all loss is not the same, right? I can go on about this forever, but I think that's good enough for right now. Shut me up.
No, that's wonderful. And we have our a first question that just came in. Jack lost his mom last year, and the most difficult part has been tragic family estrangement that's happened as a result. He's writing, I struggle with the guilt over keeping them at a distance. I'm facing this Christmas without my mom, without my other family members too. I don't know how to gauge where I'm at. Is it normal? And how does COVID impact it? So does anybody have a thought where they want to start with that?
I'll start. Yes, it is normal. I'm in the same place, unfortunately. This time last year, my grandmother died. I was about to turn 93 years old. She died on December 19th. So that's coming up Saturday. Then 2 months after that would have been February of this year, my 7-year-old nephew died. And so it has been a tremendously difficult year. And that was just before the pandemic struck. So if you can imagine me wanting to be with my family, even with my brother and sister down in Houston for this Christmas season, that was the plan, but I can't do it. And even the fact that they can't receive the comfort that they typically would receive. And we talked about this, they only had about a month or so before the pandemic struck. And they said, Jonathan, the main thing that is striking us is that we were getting used to people helping us and encouraging us to be there for us. And now we can't. And so it was a whole different issue now with the isolation of being in the home where my nephew died. So that was, I hear that person cry out, if I could use that term. And yes, it is normal. Grief is normal. What we have to realize about grief is that grief can paralyze us and it can make us afraid of living. And that's where we have to have discussions like this so that we can reach out, that it's okay to grieve. That's normal. But when it paralyzes you to where you're no longer living and you become disordered, no longer functioning properly, that's when we know that you need to get help.
I want to jump in and reflect on something that I heard in that question, which was how tense family relationships can get in a loss, right? Sometimes I think that the enforced distance of the pandemic does some families a favor, right? Because you can't come and gather together after a loss. And depending on your relationships and the systems involved, maybe that's not a blessing because we don't use that kind of language here. But it sort of gives you an out. And, I often say that grief brings out more of who people are, right? So people who tend to be kind and welcoming and attempt to be good listeners usually do all of those things when grief erupts into your life. And people who tend to be judgy or mean or abusive even, tend to be more of that. And this is just true even outside of grief related to death, that stress erodes people's coping skills, and it sort of makes you lean on what you know, right? And so you bring loss into that and death into that, and all of the intense emotions and swirls of things that happen, and it sort of magnifies those tectonic plates smashing into each other. So one, I want to say that I hear that. Families are tough. Families are tough in the best of circumstances, and death and the holidays and COVID are not the best of circumstances. So that's normal. And it's normal to not know what you need or what you want or what the best course of action is. And I think the tool that we have available in times like that is asking yourself moment to moment, what is it I need in this moment? What is it I need in order to be able to show up with all the skill that I can in order to take care of myself in a good way? And then make conscious decisions to act in the best way I can at this time with the information at hand, right? Like there's no perfect decision here. There's no, like, none of us here can say, in this situation, you should definitely reach out to this nephew and like, or this uncle and do like, we can't say that, right? There's no action plan that we can put forth for anybody who's wrestling with complex family systems in times of grief and stress. What we can say, or what I can say, is like asking yourself that question: what do I need in this moment to take care of myself so that I can show up in the ways that I need to, that are the most useful for me and help me take care of myself and others? Like that is what's under your control. The rest of it, unfortunately, we can't make other people do what we think is best.
And we have another question that came in from Leslie, but I quick want to go to Phuong Thao about that idea of what do I need to kind of cope in this moment. And I loved an example you gave when you and I spoke by phone earlier. You know, if you don't mind sharing that you had spoken about sort of missing, like, the physical contact of missing, you know, hugs from perhaps an intimate partner, and how you were able to sort of fill that need, even if it wasn't truly exactly what you were yearning for, and finding ways to just meet the bare essentials there.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for that, for bringing that up. Yeah, in that moment when I was checking with my body just wanted to curl up and to cry. And it was important for me to make time and space. And that's something that I've been able to do more to honor the grief that comes up. And so after that, I felt the need to be held after I was crying. And again, you know, during this pandemic, that wasn't practical. So something that helped me was like drawing a hot bath and like feeling the hot or the warm water just holding or hugging my body. And, you know, imagine just visualizing like myself just letting it all go in there. Like I don't have to hold it all anymore, because that's my old tendency, was to like just keep it all locked up. And so in the bath, I'm able to easily let go in that way if I can visualize it. And yeah.
That's great. Yeah. And I think, kind of like we were saying with, you know, all grief being valid, I want to be clear that we're not saying a hot bath is a substitute for, you know, the comforting embrace of someone that you love and miss. But, you know, I think our calibration for 2020 is like, is it enough for this moment? And, you know, and that you know, improvising, I guess, in the moment. So I just thought that was, you know, so yeah, we're not saying the hot bath is the solution, but in the moment of need, you know, that kind of improvisation. Megan, did you have something?
Yeah. And what I love about what you just said is that, like, when you ask yourself, what do you need in this moment? And like the body always has a response, right? Like there's always information that the body gives you, and you can't always get the thing that you need, especially right now. Like we do need human touch and compression, and our nervous systems need it. So if you can't get that, what other ways might you answer that need in your body? So I love what you just described there, because it's like, no, it's not going to solve anything. A bath is not going to solve anything, but it is a way to answer your nervous system's need for sensation, right? And how do we come up with a menu of options when certain things are not available at this time, right? And I think like a lot of the answers to what does your body need and what does your nervous system need are not solutions, they're companions. What would feel nurturing and holding at this time. So I love the way you describe that.
I love that. We do have a few questions that have come in. So Leslie writes, my mom was struck and killed while walking to her car in March. I have a 21-year-old son with high functioning autism. We were very close. How can I navigate the holidays when he wants to celebrate the holidays and I don't? It feels too raw and painful for me, but he needs the routine of Christmas. How can I balance this? Oh, that is hard. I'm sorry that that's what you're carrying right now, Leslie. Anybody wanna offer some insight for Leslie?
I can jump in first. I'm going to echo what Lindsey said. Like that is a lot to carry, right? That is a lot to carry, especially in a year where resources are pretty slim. So I think this comes down to, you know, what parents do, right? Juggling needs and prioritizing needs. I think it's okay, depending on what you know of your son, to talk about like, this is a really different year for us. And I want to be able to give you the things that you want. And I also need you to understand that I really miss my mom, right? And can we talk a little bit about what might be a different and unique Christmas for us, or season for us this year, or holiday for us this year that might sort of reflect what we're going through, right? Like, I guess my point here is that to make it collaborative, instead of assuming this person needs X, Y, and Z in order to feel good about this year, right? Assumptions are fine. It's what humans do, but we always want to check out those assumptions to see if they're valid, because we can turn ourselves inside out, making something perfect for somebody. And it turns out that's not what they were looking for. So I think you can relieve a little bit of the pressure on yourself by, in relationship, age appropriate, whatever ways for you and your family system, to talk about what do we want this holiday to look like. And then you have a better sense of what you can and cannot do, rather than overextending yourself for something that maybe doesn't need to happen. I know that I'm not the only one with an opinion on this, so I don't want to monopolize here. So lots of ways to deal with this.
I'll just jump in. Being a child and adolescent psychiatrist, you know, realizing that autism is one of those things that, as a parent, you are continuing to learn about your child. And one of the things we recognize about children who have autism is that they do need familiarity, and they do need routines. Transitions are very difficult. I would submit to you that transitions are difficult for people, period, but especially for those who are in the autism spectrum disorder. First of all, my condolences. I mean, that is a tragic, just a tragic experience that I can't even imagine, just being hit. I mean, it's hitting me, you know, metaphorically. But let me tell you that one of the things that the other panelists have talked about is being able to have some sense of control. And that is one of the major ways in which you can help to manage grief. And so I mentioned control because you can help, even though you may not feel like celebrating Christmas and the child does, but you can help in saying, hey, let's see if there's a new tradition that we can start this year. Let's see if there is something that we can do to celebrate. I believe this will be the grandmother's death, and yet, you know, still allow the child to have some sense of Christmas. Because one of the things I recognize with children will remember when tragic experiences occur, and they will manifest typically how the parent handles the tragedy. That is shown over and over again. And I'm not saying that you have to be a superwoman or, you know, superhuman being, but how you manage this time with your child will help him in seeing how to be able to manage transitions as he gets older. And so, yes, it may feel a little bit uncomfortable with you, but look and see how you can possibly start, like I said, something new this year. in celebration of Christmas. And that way, maybe you can have both needs met. That's the idea.
And we have another question, but I'm actually going to borrow quickly a story that was shared in Speaking Grief. It's one of the videos we shared recently by a wonderful human named Jack, who spoke about trying to carry on the same traditions that he and his family had done with his mother, and that had been this sort of cookie bake tradition they did, and they tried to do it just for the sake of doing it because it was something they had already done, after his mother had died. And it just, like, he describes it wonderfully. I urge people to go on our account and check it out. But basically just, like, the cookies didn't taste right, the smell was weird, it was crowded, like it just wasn't a great experience. And in a way that was weirdly freeing, because it empowered him and the family to as Jonathan, I think Megan were saying, to find ways to adapt so that it might still be a new tradition, but it doesn't have to be exactly the same as it was, because it won't be without that special person. It won't be exactly the same. So we have another question from Lisa. She writes that after my special needs adult son was hit by a car, he's riding his bike, and suffered irreversible brain damage, that he had to be taken off life support earlier this year. I'm experiencing traumatic responses, bodily responses that truly scare me. What suggestions can you offer? I'm in counseling twice a week, plus online support. Finances destroyed by this loss. Is there medication for this? So I'll just put a disclaimer now that we're not, allowed to offer specific medical consultation on a chat like this. But I'm wondering if there are any pieces of advice or guidelines or suggestions our panel can make. Not giving that official medical consultation. So maybe Jonathan, if you want to start with this.
Yeah, again, this is another tragic story. This is just amazing. I say amazing not to be something positive. Is what we call cumulative grief, and so many of us have suffered cumulative grief, hit after hit after hit. I'm glad that this person is seeking help. I'm glad that this person is seeking professional help. Is there medication that could potentially help? I would have to assess that person before I could offer any medications. There are a class of medications that is known to help for those who are going through, sounds like post-traumatic stress disorder, accompanied with some mood symptoms. And so there are some antidepressants that are out there that may help in reducing some of the symptoms. But let me tell you, the medication is not going to alleviate the pain. It's not going to alleviate the sorrow. And that's one of the things that I really major in. Even though I'm a psychiatrist, I understand that I have to work together with the therapist. I have to work together with the persons on my team to provide a comprehensive approach when you're dealing with such a traumatic loss as this. And so my advice would be continue to remain in treatment. I hope that you're with a person who you trust, that you can feel comfortable with. And again, that takes time. There's a saying that says time heals all wounds. I don't necessarily use that saying all the time. I think that what happens is it allows for us to manage better. I think that's a little bit better. And so my prayer is that, that as she goes through, I forgot her name, but as she goes through this time, that time will help her to manage as she goes through this difficult time.
Thank you. And that actually leads into this discussion about seeking clinical help in different ways that people might be struggling. A lot of times things like loneliness can feel like depression, and we often use the term "I'm feeling depressed" and depression interchangeably. What is the difference? And Jonathan, we'll go to you for this again, and Megan or Phuong Thao can jump in. The difference between feeling lonely or experience a depressed mood and suffering from depression. That feels like maybe a distinction we might want to make.
Well, depression is a real illness. And I speak so strongly about that because within the Black community and a few other communities, they don't believe that miles a day. That is one of the biggest stigmas out there, that depression is not a real illness. And if you look back at some research, actually it is overtaking heart disease as being the #1 illness in the world, which is just amazing. So depression, the real illness of it can be put into 8 symptoms, SIGI caps. So when a person has a true depressive disorder, it is for 2 consecutive weeks, all right? 2 consecutive weeks, and some of these 8 symptoms, SIGI caps. I'm just gonna go very briefly because I don't wanna take too much time here, but it's SIGECAPS. Sleep, interest, guilt, energy, concentration, appetite, psychomotor, agitation or retardation. I know that's a long one. And 8 is suicidality. If I had time, I would break down each of those 8, but those are the 8 symptoms that a person will see in depression. Now, on the flip side is you hear a lot of people say, well, I'm depressed, I'm this, I'm that. And what I use is the term distressed. So there is a difference between distressed and disordered. Everybody suffers distress. You can have a bad day, you can have a bad week, but when that now becomes 2 consecutive weeks, and there are people out there who are truly depressed for 2 consecutive weeks and longer, sometimes 2 years, that's when that is major depression. So that's kind of the clinical definition between just someone saying, I feel depressed today, I'm having a bad day, or I'm having a bad week. That's more of a distress versus the true disorder of major depressive disorder. So that's kind of the quick and dirty of it.
Thank you.
Yeah, and it's always such an interesting discussion to talk about, like the clinical parameters of certain conditions and disorders, because there can be so much nuance, right? Like all of those diagnostic criteria for major depressive disorder also show up in times of great stress. They also show up in grief, right? Grief is not depression, right? Depression is not grief. They can overlap, but they aren't the same thing. And I think one of the challenges, for me in working in the grief world so much is that we tend to medicalize grief, and in our sort of diagnostic language, we say, this means there's something wrong here. And I think that wrong, like that assessment of the human condition as being wrong pervades a lot of the language. And even when you maybe don't believe that in your own work, in your own perspective of it, it's like it's sort of baked in to the language. So I want to make sure we emphasize here that if you see yourself in what gets described as any clinical condition or clinical disorder, it doesn't mean you're doing it wrong. It's really shorthand for your providers to be able to talk about, here are the things this person is struggling with and carrying, so that we can then look at, okay, let's use this set of approaches for that set of problems or challenges or stressors or disruptions to daily life, so that we can be as effective and supportive as we possibly can be. There's such a stigma, as you brought up, there's such a stigma, especially in certain populations, around claiming depression as something worthy of respect and care, instead of as a marker that you failed in some way, right? And one of the reasons that depression is such a killer in cultures all around the world is because the way that we talk about pain is so wonky and so sideways. Like we look at pain as a problem to be solved instead of a human condition to be supported and listened to, right? I don't want to go on my complete soapbox about that, because that's not what we're here for. But I do want to make sure that we add that into the conversation, that we do have these categories as clinicians for certain diagnoses, and there are certain diagnostic criteria. And you want to talk with somebody if you have concerns about, oh gosh, I hit all of those criteria and it's been a minute, like it's been more than 2 weeks. Talk with people and find out, is this something I need to be concerned about? Is this something that comes up because my child died, or my mom was killed in a motor vehicle accident, or I had a miscarriage? Is there a situation here that is normal and healthy and deeply uncomfortable that deserves care and connection and companionship and love? And or is this something that has maybe changed the way that my brain works? And we need to bring in some other tools that can help my brain and my nervous system and my body get to a place where I can more easily absorb what's happened, right? Lots of different ways to look at it.
I appreciate that. And to kind of recap that, it sounds like we're saying, you know, to really watch our internalization of any label that we're given and frame it in a way of this is helping us to find a strategy, and it's not something you need to take on as a human in terms of some sort of stigma or flaw. I think is an important message. We do have a couple questions, but I did just want to say, I think that when we do feel like we might be at that level where we need some to tap into some other resources, you know, making that next step or that call can be really intimidating, especially if you've never done it before. So just what is that actionable step if someone is watching right now and they think, hey, as you said, that's me and it's been a while, you know, can we dispel some fear around that by just talking through who do you call, what do you say, you know, how do you go about accessing the help that you think you might need? Megan, you're it.
I'm it. I'm it. So I love that you phrased that with like being aware of our own internal biases about whether we're deserving of help and if it's okay that we need help. I'm a big fan of reaching out for help in a less overcome or overwhelmed minute so that you sort of know what to expect should you need it. So like the crisis text line is great. Any of those sort of text-based or app-based online services, you really encourage people to check them out and find out what they offer so that you can make an informed decision of like, when I'm having a really tough time and I'm really nervous about the things that I want to share, are these people I trust, right? If you're looking for a therapist, sometimes that's needle in a haystack, right? Having like a set of questions that you want to ask somebody, sometimes you can get those questions answered by their website, right? But like, what is their approach to someone like you? How do you feel when you talk to them? If you know, it's never going to feel really good to share some really deep, personal, intimate stuff with somebody you've never met before at first. So we're not looking for, I felt great talking to this person, but more like, do I feel like this is a place where I can be brave? Right? So looking for a therapist, asking your family doctors and your allopathic and integrative professionals in your life, who they know and who they talk to. Like this really is a bit of bravery here. And I really want to encourage you to do that, because depression and grief and all of the other things that can happen to us in the course of human life, like they get harder in isolation. And as hard as it is to reach out and look for help, especially when you don't get the exact help you need on the first couple of tries, as hard as it is to find the right help and the right support, it's harder to live without it, right? So look online, ask your friends. I would say don't be afraid to ask for help, but you're going to be afraid to ask for help. So do it anyway, right? It's like things are going to be difficult in either direction. If you try to suffer alone without getting support, that's one hard thing. It's also hard to ask for help and to look for resources, but that's a hard thing that has a much better chance of you getting the help you need than the hardness of suffering by yourself, right?
And I just want to say, we have a couple questions. I'm going to get to questions from Cheryl and Heather. I have a question I want to throw to Phuong Thao, but real quick, Jonathan, I was listening to you in another interview, and I want to acknowledge when we're talking about getting help, that as Megan said, it can always be hard. And I think for certain identities, it can be even harder. And I know one of the things I've heard you say is especially for cis men, you know, people identifying as male, that can be an extra hurdle that has to be overcome in stigmas and how we think about these. So if you can just speak to that and asking for help.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I agree with Megan. It takes courage to ask for help. And, you know, for a man, and again, I'm not playing the gender role here, is just, you know, some men, you know, they just don't want to ask for help. Some women don't want to ask for help either. So I'm not trying to be sexist or anything like that, but, you know, we do know, and literature shows that for men, it can be more difficult for them to ask for help, especially when it comes to their uh, to their physical health. Not even their mental health, but that's to start with physical health. You know, oh man, I'm gonna walk this off. Oh man, I'll be all right. I got this pain. I'll be all right. I'll take some aspirin, ibuprofen, and keep on moving. And come to find out, it was something much deeper. And so, what I advise is that if there's any man out there, it takes courage. I will never forget when I was with my father. We have a history of prostate cancer in my family, and I was with my father, and I was a resident at the time, and there was a prostate mobile out there, and I said, Dad, let's go get prostate check, and really I was going for him, and he said, no, I don't want to do that. I was like, well, I'll go with you. Me saying that I would go with him encouraged him to stay in line, because it was a long line. It was about like a 30-45 minute wait, and come to find out, it was during that test that he found out he had prostate cancer. What would have happened if I had not the courage to speak up and to go with my father? So there's really two lessons there. So it takes courage to speak up, and then find someone who you can trust to say, hey, I'm scared. Would you go with me? There's nothing wrong with that. And so I tell people that even when for mental health, and when people come into my office for initial evaluations, they may have their spouse with them. They may have someone else who they trust. And I ask, do you want this person to come back here with you, at least for a part of the interview, so that they can feel better? And so those things are just some of the ways in which I would advise every man out there. You should get checked out by your doctor every year without fail. And if you need mental health assistance, there's nothing wrong with that. We're seeing sports players now come out, celebrities talking about the issues that they have had. And so I just want to let you know that there's nothing wrong with getting help. It requires courage.
Thank you. And again, we have a couple questions, but Phuong Thao, I wanted to go back to as I think Megan and Jonathan were speaking about some of the stress and how that can just kind of pervade into so many different areas of life. And I know you've written about, living in a state of hyperarousal and feeling that yourself, and being tuned into what's going on with your body when that's happening. And, maybe we're not in our most optimal state when we're feeling that. So I get, what does that state of hyperarousal feel like? How does that show up for you? How do you pay attention to that?
Sorry, I stepped away. Was that question for me?
Yeah. So we were talking about being in that state of hyperarousal and how that can kind of, skew or shade everything else that we're experiencing and dealing with it. And I know that you've written some about that. So I'm just wondering if you can share, what that shows, how that feels for you, and what that might show up like for other people, and the effect that can have on, in sort of a ripple effect on other parts of our lives.
Yeah, definitely. And so something that helps me to know when I'm either in hyperarousal or hypoarousal is noticing when I'm not in my window of tolerance. So usually when I'm in my window of tolerance, I'm able to be fully present. I'm able to think things through. I'm able to have patience. And so when I'm in hyperarousal, I find myself my thoughts are racing. They're fast. I notice in my body, things are moving really fast. My heart is beating faster. I notice there's a lot more tension in my shoulders or in this area here. And then also noticing I am much more irritable. I don't have patience, and things that usually won't activate me or set me off, I'm more, it's kind of the buttons just push, it's stuck on. And so those are the different ways. And also my breathing, I find myself having breathing either faster or much more shallower. And usually when I'm in my window of presence, I notice I'm taking fuller, deep breaths. And so when I'm in hyperarousal, my breathing pattern changes. And so those are the different responses, and also finding myself like having difficulty sleeping because like there's just so much going on here in my head or in my body. So like my body is, because it's stuck on sympathetic, in the sympathetic nervous system, it's not able to switch over to parasympathetic system, which is where I'm able to rest. And so when I'm stuck in sympathetic nervous system, it's hard to sleep and it's so hard to relax. Like I'm always going. I'm like, and like, so I'm not able to be in a relaxed state. So that's how I know I'm in hyperarousal.
So when you find yourself in that state, what are some strategies that you employ for kind of, you know, helping that switch over and getting yourself back into that, that presence?
Yes. So when I do become aware that I'm stuck in hyperarousal, something that helps bring me back is if deep breathing is not activating for you, because sometimes connecting to breath may be activating for some people, but if it's not, then I allow myself to, like, something that's really helped me is like placing like my hand on my heart and my belly and allowing myself to breathe in deeply through the nose. And picking a number that feels good for your body. So for me, it feels good to breathe and count up to 4. And then exhaling out of the nose through the mouth and counting down from that same number. And allowing myself to breathe forever, how long, until I notice that the speed internally is beginning to come down, to come into neutral. So breathing is one way to bring myself back to presence and also to my breath and slowing that down. And so when my body is able to feel soothed, like my nervous system is able to feel soothed, and it's because my body is like, this is a signal for my body, like it's okay. Like I'm able to breathe more deeper and more slower. And that's able to likely switch on the parasympathetic nervous system, where it's like, okay, so everything is fine. And then it's able to turn on all those other different functions.
Lindsey, can I say something real quick to that?
Absolutely.
Why that is so important? Because when you are grieving, everything seems like it's out of control. And when you are able to get some sense of control, just if it's just by breathing and doing those breathing techniques, it really registers in your head that at least I have some sense of control. And so it may sound simple, but I just had to emphasize that really allows some sense of control, something that you can manage. And so thank you for demonstrating that for us, because that really does work with your psyche to say, wow, I'm able now to relax and to take that deep breath and find things that will calm what I call your troubled spirit, you know, and that will definitely help.
Yeah, and I think finding ways to support your nervous system, it doesn't fix whatever's wrong, right? It's not going to bring your person back. It's not going to change your financial situation. It's not going to change the interpersonal dynamics of a family. It's not going to change depression or chronic illness or systemic racism. It's not going to change any of those things. But those practices, like were just described here, they help your nervous system be able to respond to the world instead of sort of running off into panic that makes your suffering worse. So all of us are on board with doing those things that can help your nervous system find some equanimity and some balance so that you can respond to the situation at hand. And it does give you a little sense of control in a world that doesn't feel like it's fair or equitable or under any control at all anywhere. Yeah, small pockets of feeling like you have some autonomy and sovereignty are really important.
That's great. So we do have about 10 minutes left, and we have 3 questions I want to try to get through that have come in. So first is Cheryl writes, I have people saying to me that next year will be a better year. It's like it's all going to magically disappear. And I feel like they're saying I should just be over my husband's death from January. I find it pretty insulting. What do I say is some people haven't had a good year for loss? I'm going to punt that to Megan.
Yeah, I love this one because we're seeing this all over the place, right? Like it's going to be 2021 soon and we've got a vaccine and everything's going to be okay. Well, everything is not going to be okay. First of all, the changing of the Gregorian calendar does not magically change all things. There's a new year every day for different traditions. But this idea that things will be better later, so stop being so sad now, like that's a pretty pervasive message that we hear all over the place, right? Like things will be better later. And I don't want to discount later. We have to have something to hope for. But that message, things are going to be better next year. Next year, you won't feel this way. All of those things, the effect that they have is actually to dismiss the person's loss or the person's pain or whatever they're struggling with. It basically says it doesn't matter how much you're suffering right now because later it's going to be better. That's rude. So your question, Cheryl, was what do I say? So any number of things here, and it also kind of depends on the relationship, how snarky you're feeling, how well regulated your nervous system is feeling, how resourced and skilled you're feeling in the moment. So pick your response. But I would often say things like that things might be better later doesn't help me right now, with a little bit of slightly uncomfortable eye contact to just be like, but sometimes you do smile and nod just to get through the moment because that's the only thing you've got in you and you don't feel like educating, and that is fine. So I want to let people off the hook for that one, that it is not always on you to educate people who don't know any better or who have good intentions and they're just not delivering efficiently and effectively with those good intentions, to put it nicely. So you don't always have to educate. I want that to be clear. If you do feel like you want to say something, it's okay to be blunt, right? We often excuse people who say insensitive, harmful, hurtful things, clueless things, because they have good intentions. And the thing that I always say back to that is, if your intention is to be helpful, you need to know that what you're doing is not helping. So let's talk about some ways that you can actually be more efficient and effective with the love and support you intend. What you just said isn't going to get you there, right? The fact that things will be different next year doesn't negate the pain that I'm in now. And I would really like to stay present with that, right? You want to have that sound like you and not like me, because everybody sounding like me is really weird. But some way of naming what just happened there, right? And this applies for any kind of loss or stressor, right? Like we've got a lot of cultural conversation and political conversation going on right now that like Biden will save us, or Kamala Harris will save us, or the vaccine is going to save us. Well, all of those things are steps in the right direction and they're hopeful and I'm excited about them. And there is no magic pill here or magic person or magic response that is going to undo or erase the pain of the world. So how do we stay present to that and still hold out hope for things being different in a good direction later, right? So when you feel like you've got the energy and the resources, redirect people. When you don't, it's okay. Other people will take up the education slack. We got you.
And Jonathan, you have something to add?
Absolutely. Thank you, Megan. I sign off 100% on what you said, especially how snarky you want to be. I caught that. Well, let me tell you, just to mention, just from the physician standpoint, this vaccine is here, but let me tell you, it is not the cure-all, it's not the end-all. We are still learning with the vaccine, let me tell you. We don't know how much of the virus can even still be spread once you even get the vaccine. If you go back, these are still the questions that we're still trying to answer. Just to think that because we now have certain things in the pipeline is going to erase all the pain from 2020, that we're sadly mistaken by that. One of the things that I would say, just shifting real quickly, is that when you're grieving, you have to watch the company that you're keeping. That is very key. You want to make sure that the people who you are around are people who can speak life into you, who can encourage you, who can surround you. And so you have to be careful. And everybody around you who is your friend, you may come to find out they really are not your friend. I think I just saw something on CNN just yesterday about a woman who had to distance herself from a long-term friend because the pandemic now showed her who her friend truly was. Isn't that something? that this pandemic is really showing people's true colors, so to speak, or their true character. I think we've already alluded to that earlier. So as you're grieving, yes, my point here is just watch who the people who you're around, and then let them know what you need. And then vice versa. If you're a friend, before you start saying something, ask. Before I deliver any type of recommendations, well, at least I try. I always say use universal statements. I try my best to ask what a person needs before I just deliver it, because that way it reels them in and then lets them know that I have buy-in, and that I'm getting buy-in from them also on how I can be a help.
That's great. And we do have these two more questions I'm going to get through. We'll go a few minutes past 7:30 just so we can touch on these. But I love that, I think the phrase, would that be helpful is a great one to keep in your pocket. Heather writes, being in the helping field, I notice I'm catching myself having difficulty practicing what I preach around finding regulation and coping in my own life. I'm wondering how the panelists are handling their own process and specific activities or ways to refill the tank. And again, if we can stay a little succinct here, just so we can get to that last question. Let's start with Phuong Thao on this one.
Yes, thank you for, something that's been helpful for me again is like checking in with my body every day and having that be built into my routine, because once I tune into my body, then I can see, okay, what's my body telling me that I need? Do I need to like slow down? Do I need to like connect to my breath and breathe more and bring my nervous system back to like a place of presence? And also like music has been like, so like I've been listening to Spotify like every day, and like there's music, and it like what music makes my body feel alive and dance. And movement is so important during this time because we store so much in our bodies that movement is a way to like move things through. And so finding a movement that resonates for you. So, maybe it's yoga, maybe it's Pilates, maybe it's just walking outside, or maybe it's dancing, or like having your in-home gym and, lifting weights, as long as, moving your body really helps also. And it also, finding some time to like, just not be connected to the internet or the tech or your phone, because it keeps our brain on all the time. And like, you might find yourself in doom scroll for hours. So it's important to like disconnect from tech if possible, and like just find ways to like slow down, and like what are things that you can enjoy that will nourish you. And so like for me, it could be like connecting with my plants. I love seeing like how each plant is doing too, and like that helps me to like remember, oh yeah, I gotta water myself too, or else it's gonna end up like this plant that I forgot. So it's like a mirror for me. So finding things that are small and doable that will nourish you and that brings you alive and joy. And that's going to be unique to each person.
Great. And I'll go to each Megan and Jonathan. So Megan, what's refilling your tank, or what do you recommend specifically?
My tank is not getting filled very much these days. In fact, I was just having that conversation with people this morning that like there's just between the business and the personal life stuff and the family stuff and all of these things, like they're things that feed me are feeling very few and far between these days. And so the two things that I'm doing are prioritizing sleep, because if I'm not getting enough sleep or staying asleep, then everything is going to fall apart. So prioritizing sleep to the best of my ability, and playing with the dog, who is so adaptable and so amazing and such a little joy bug. And probably those two things are not really enough at this point to fill my tanks, because the tanks are pretty depleted at this time of year. But definitely keeping the lights on in my heart and my mind is sleep and the dog.
Jonathan.
Yeah, I'm just going to try to name some things real quick. So exercise, I was able to start build a home gym here in my home. So I agree with you. Number two, home improvements just around the house. There was just things that, because I was at home, I just started just doing things around the house. I'm not a handyman, so I had to get some help. But just having the idea of the project, that helped. just looking at these screens. So that's why I even had to get readers. That's why you saw already about the eye strain is real. so I try not to watch as much TV. Yeah, thank you. That make me feel bad here. And so, you know, the TV rarely comes on. I'm reading more. And so as I'm reading more, it is actually stimulating my mind. I have never read this much in 1 year ever, even in medical school. I don't think, but I'm just reading everything. I'm just gobbling it all up. And that's actually helping to fill my tank. And then I'm a man of faith. And so I make sure that I stay in tune. I pray, I read the Bible. I want to make sure that I am not letting go of my faith. And that is one thing that people have done during this pandemic. And I believe it's the Pew Research Center. They have studied where a lot more people have let go of their faith beliefs. And so I know that we are a country of faith believers. And so I want to encourage, this is not the time to let go of your faith, whatever it may be. Hold on to it, stick to those principles.
Thank you. And then our last question from the chat is, what are some options you can recommend for poor and low wage people and people in the coverage gap who have no insurance and cannot afford mental health care?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's a tough question too, because each state is different when it comes to how they handle those who are disenfranchised or impoverished when it comes to mental health care. Here in Maryland, where I am, we do have one of the better mental health services. I'm originally from Chicago. And so here in Maryland, there are crisis support teams that you can call, and it really is free of charge. But so it's really dependent upon each state. I would say check in with your state Medicaid system because typically they have some type of boundary or category in which if you only make a certain amount of money, you can still get that state insurance. And truthfully, state Medicaid is the best for mental health services. It may not be the best for other stuff, but for mental health services, it allows so many other services to be able to be added on, supportive services. So just because you may be disenfranchised, don't look at it, well, that's hard to say because I want to tell people how not to look at it, but just let them know that there are still services out there. There's different support groups. NAMI is a very important one that can possibly lead you in the right direction. So I know that we're being seen and watched in various states. So check with your state to see what resources are out there for those persons who may be in that category of impoverished or disenfranchised.
And I want to jump in here on this one too. And this is a much bigger systemic issue than certainly we can address in this kind of forum, or even like if we had 6 months, we couldn't address all of the different elements of this, because we've got systems of oppression and ability and access and houselessness and disability access and economic injustice and racial injustice and all of these things tied in with providers and systems needing to be compensated for their work, and who's going to compensate if it's just such a complicated system, which means a lot of people don't get the help that they deserve and a lot of the help that they need for no fault of their own. And we certainly don't make navigating those systems easy. I know these systems, I've worked community mental health. I know these systems inside and out, and I still call insurance companies, and I'm so frustrated that I give up and don't always get the things that I need because of the Byzantine and annoying and punitive systems that you have to crawl through in order to get services. And that's coming from me, and I know the language. So when we look at how do you, as a person who feels or is barred from the services that you feel you need, how are you supposed to navigate that system when you don't speak the language and you don't know the hidden codes and you don't know what's out there? It's really, really difficult. So I want to name that and validate that, how frustrating it is to, when you're in pain, when you need support, to also then have to figure out how to find appropriate services for you when there's no roadmap and it's not clear and you don't always qualify for the things that are there. So I want to say that first because this is hard. And the second thing is that you got to stitch together imperfect systems, right? So one of the great things about the internet right now is that, well, it's great and it's not so great. You can find anything. So you can find free, no cost, low cost, sort of peer support places, informal groups, formal groups, all of these things. So the quality of care is going to vary widely, but honestly, that's true with paid services as well. But keep looking for a community where you feel like you're heard and you're encouraged and supported, where you're not, where you don't have unsolicited advice shoveled at you or suspect medical advice. Don't go for that. But be ferocious on your own behalf about looking for those places. Follow those trails of breadcrumbs that you find. If you connect with somebody online who kind of shares the same sort of things that you share, ask them where they go for support. I hate that you have to do this. It shouldn't be this way. It should not be this hard. It is this hard. And you know, on days where you do have a little bit of mojo or a little bit of energy, be ferocious in your search and stitch together those pieces to make something that can help you get through, right? And if you've got the energy, agitate for change in the places where you feel like you have power to do that. It's a really big, complex, complicated system that needs a lot more attention than it gets, and it's not fair. So keep looking and keep asking questions.
All right, and we are out of time, but I just want to close with just quickly, if each of you can just give a message to someone who might be listening right now, who for whatever reason, whatever grief or stress or loss they're carrying, is having a hard time right now. Megan, you're unmuted, so we'll start with you and then go around.
I forgot to put myself back on mute. So what's my message? Gosh, whatever you are feeling is normal and it makes perfect sense. I think I can sum up everything with that, as uncomfortable as it feels and as chaotic and messy and untenable as it feels. It's all normal and you deserve to be heard and supported inside it, no matter what's unfolding.
Thank you, Megan. And Phuong Thao, what about you?
I would say honor your process, honor your own timing. Like your timing and processing grief, loss is going to be different to someone, and not to compare, but really like honor yourself. Like if it takes longer or shorter, or sometimes it might go away and then it just surfaces again, you know, months later, that's okay, because, you know, your timing is you and there's no need to compare. So that's the message I would like to share.
Thank you. And Jonathan?
The message I would share is keep functioning. You can function and not be okay, but keep functioning. And I say that because we don't want people to get to a point to where they stop functioning and give up. Even if you got to crawl, even if your mojo, as Megan was saying, is not on 10 today, keep functioning. And so that's what I want to encourage people out there. Keep at it. There'll be days when you won't feel like it, but keep functioning. And we hope that at one point in time that you will be better and that you will be able to do better.
Thank you all so much. That's all we have time for tonight. I want to thank everyone who was here and who made this such a great discussion. I also want to thank our panelists, Megan Devine, Dr. Jonathan Shepard, and Phuong Thao MacLeod, for sharing your time and insight and compassion with us. This discussion is brought to you by Speaking Grief, a public media initiative produced by WPSU Penn State with philanthropic support from the New York Life Foundation. For lots more resources, along with the full Speaking Grief documentary, you can go to the website speakinggrief.org. There's a lot of great stuff on there. You can also go to the Speaking Grief Facebook page and follow us on Facebook and Instagram at WPSU Grief. Also, a great new resource on children's grief. Check out Kai's Journey, which is a film and book series dedicated to children and families who've experienced the death of a loved one. The books are available for download for free, and I believe our moderators are going to post that link, those links in our chat. Lastly, we are working on getting some more of these discussions going in 2021. So if you have a moment, please fill out the survey, which again, I think the link will be shared. It's really short, I promise, but just to let us know what topics would be helpful to you and that you'd like to see us cover in future discussions. Again, thank you all so much for being here. I'm Lindsey Whissel Fenton, and for me and all of us at WPSU, we just want to wish you a happy, healthy, peaceful winter holiday season. Be well, and thank you so much for being here tonight.